All right, guys, now we're going to move on to the last technique in this series. Is going to be the inverted armbar from full guard. Inverted armbar because rather than his arm facing me with me pulling down on it at the end of the lever in order to execute the submission, his arm's actually going to be rotated, and we're going to isolate the end of the lever and then pull down within the middle where the fulcrum normally would be in order to execute the technique. So starting in full guard. Now, for this variation, I like to actually come over top of his wrists, cupping over top, and I'm going to swim outward as I do my reverse crunch. Whatever side I want to attack, I'm going to try to do a diagonal crunch on that side, starting at that knee, going to the opposite shoulder. So now I'm going to attack Brian's right arm, which is the arm on my left side. So as I swim under, I'm going to bring that knee towards my shoulder to get him at the angle that I want in order to execute. When I do this at the same time, my arm's going to wave high. So as I come underneath, my arm waves high, and what that does is it allows his wrist to drop right where I want it to be. If I swim under and try to grab, his wrist is going to be far from isolated from where I want it. So let that big wave set his wrist where you want it to be at the end. Now a shrug of my shoulder and a rotation of my forearm is going to keep that guy locked into place. So that's the first thing I'm going to look to do. Now I bend my arm right above his elbow. If you need to, if you feel like, you're not exactly sure where it is, start high and then drag down with it. Now it's about finishing the technique. Now before we do this, we have the wrist isolated. Now we need to isolate the shoulder before we can attack the elbow. So what I look to do is I'm going to hip out towards my side, and now my knee is going to come towards the other side of his head and pinch right underneath of his shoulder. On the other side, my leg drags up, I pinch my knees together, and now I wiper my leg so I have good control of his body. I'm still bladed off towards my side. The next thing that I try doing, this again, it's just my preferred finish or my preferred method to finish, is I bring my arm back and I let just right where my hand meets my wrist start just on the bottom side of his elbow, right onto his triceps, and I'm gonna roll as I scrape across. That gets that rotation in the arm, is gonna make it nice and tight. So as I roll, the crease of my elbow comes in, I go towards my I Dream a Genie grip, so both hands on both triceps. And now the last part is the method that I try to finish with. I don't hug down super tight on it. I'm gonna do a roll motion with my arms. So as I rotate through, I'm gonna come and roll my forearms in order to finish. When I do this, I also hip down a little bit on the shoulder side. I'm gonna look over the shoulder, over my bottom shoulder as we go to finish. So as I go to roll, common mistakes, what we need to avoid is don't extend your body too much. A lot of times what happens is people get to this point and they start trying to really squeeze down, and now I've lost the wrist isolation that we had created before. We need to keep this between my head and my shoulder in order to finish. So I don't want to extend away too much. I'm going to look over my shoulder as I shrug on the top side, and now as I look to roll, I'm going to scoop my hands. So as we come under, scooping, and then we're looking to finish from there. We'll go through the whole thing one more time. So from the full guard position, we're coming over top of his wrist, peeling off, and now I do my diagonal crunch. As I do my diagonal crunch, I wave high, let the wrist set right into my shoulder. Now sometimes when I do this, it'll be a little high that lands. That's okay. When I hip out, it'll drag out towards the wrist and end up being where I want it to be. So as I'm doing this, my knee comes underneath of his chin, my foot is in the bottom hip, I'm gonna close this knee right up to the bottom part of his shoulder, like so. The other leg is gonna come up and I pinch down, so now the shoulder is being pinched between my two knees. And my leg, on the same side as my top leg, is gonna be down his back, so almost like going down his spine. This is gonna stop him from being able to lift his hips, or if he does, he's bringing me with him. So the last part is the execution. I'm going to take my wrist bone, go right behind his shoulder, so right in the bottom part of his arm, and roll it to get that rotation that we want to get. Establish my I Dream a Genie grip, pinching, I look over my bottom shoulder, and now I go in a scoop motion as I drop my top knee down on top. That's the inverted armbar from full guard.